Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Future Tech podcast series, where it's me, Charlie Sell, the MD of Arrows Group, interviewing, having open conversations with thought leaders, technical leaders, people out in the world there that also share a passion for our STEM graduate community, where they share their story. We talk about culture of companies and those all important bits of advice for many of our listeners on getting your foot in the door. So I'm really pleased to have Amrit Santhirasenan with me today. It's apologies if I've got the surname slightly wrong, Amrit.
No, you nailed it. You nailed
Oh,
it.
there we go. There we go. Amrit's the founder of HX. HX is a fintech business based in London with a global client base. And they're essentially building a platform for data driven decision making in the financial sector. And hopefully part of our conversation we'll find out a bit more about it, as it really is a growing sector for many of our STEM listeners. Fintech is a world that, as we all know, is only going one way, which is up. um, but we'll jump straight into it as always, and welcome Amrit to the show, and ask you to
Hi,
give us a
Charlie.
bit of your story.
Sure thing. Yeah. So I suppose I'm a STEM graduate myself. A long, long time ago now, when it wasn't really called STEM, but I studied computer science back in the early 2000s, um, and yeah, did computer science. Really enjoyed it. But really interestingly, graduated at the time, which I always joke with my friends now, where just around the time of the dot-com bubble bursting, and so lots of people thought it actually wasn't a good idea to be a software engineer for a career. So I always tell my, I was joke with my friends and my team now that I was one of those idiots that thought it would be a bad idea to be a software engineer. One of the maybe 50 people in the world who thought, you know what, I've got a computer science graduate from a top university, but I'm not going to be a software engineer. And so instead, actually, I've always enjoyed mathematics. I did lots of maths at school, and probably if I could, at that time, certainly if I would have gone back in time, I would have done maybe a mix of computer science and maths. But anyway, the rest is history, as they say. I ended up becoming an actuary. So left my computer science degree behind, or maybe not left it behind, but put it to one side. And actuaries build mathematical models. So that's what we do. Actuaries do lots and lots of different things. They work in lots of sectors. I ended up in the insurance sector. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But I effectively became a kind of a professional kind of mathematician, statistician, whose job it was to build mathematical models to help financial industries make better decisions with data. So you can see how HX came along. But I did that having come from a software engineering background, which was actually probably the most useful skill set that anyone could have. Because I came into an industry, unsurprisingly, these mathematical models, it's been long since that they were built, they were written down on pieces of paper. They're all built using, predominantly spreadsheets, but lots of software to do that. So it turns out I could actually be very useful, having pivoted away from software engineering. I still had a very useful skill set when it came to actually building these mathematical models. So I became an actuary and kind of, ended up doing that for a little while.
Wow.
So, having done that, I did that for quite a while. And that was really fun, really great. I ended up doing that for, really most of my career. I spent as an actuary. Started back in the mid 2000s and ended up working as an actuary for 12 years and had a really good run. It turned out that an actuary come software engineer is a very useful skill set. Ended up doing that, and actually the funny pivot that I ended up back into tech was that I ended up running a function. So I started off as an analyst building mathematical models and ended up becoming a head of pricing and analytics, doing this sort of work, running a team for one of the largest insurers in the space. The type of insurance that I ended up working with is called specialty and commercial insurance. So if you think about insurance generally, you tend to think of, well, I'm insuring my car or if I'm going on holiday or, my house or my pets. It turns out there are lots and lots of other types of insurance. If you're a film star on a set, you can get insurance in case you get hurt. The Valencian football team. This is my favourite one. I probably wheel this out at too many podcasts now, but I'll tell it anyway because it's one of my favourites. You know, the Valencian football team. I remember a long time ago bought insurance against losing their TV rights if they got relegated.
Wow.
We insured lotteries in China against paying out their top prize too many times. It turns out you can insure pretty much anything, and the mathematical models to build this sort of to solve these sorts of problems are quite difficult and complex to build. So I ended up running a team doing this sort of work, and to cut a long story short, got into a really senior position doing this and wanted to find the software to do my job better. Right, I ended up moving to. You can see where this is going. I ended up moving into like I said, a large company, had a great budget. I thought, you know what? I've got a software engineering background. I've got a great team. I've got management buy-in. I've got everything I need. I'm going to go build a 21st century pricing system. Turns out there were no tools to allow me to do this. And so, this is the classic founder story in many cases, right? It's it's frustration-driven development, as I like to call it. And so I decided to set up HX. To solve the problem, because effectively what we describe now is we're saying we're building the software we wish we had, when we were doing our jobs as actuaries. I don't know if that's a good potted history for you.
That is a brilliant storyline, because I think that frustration-driven development, you are so right. I think it's underpinned many successful startups and businesses, because it's real life identity of a challenge, isn't it? It's not sitting in a room thinking, what can I solve? It's real life. This is a problem. Now I'm going to find a solution for it.
Completely so. And I think, this is one of the beauties of coming from an engineering background is I think one of the greatest skills an engineering degree can give you is a problem solver's mindset. Right, is the ability to look at a problem and go, what does it fit? What are its constituent parts of this problem? And how can I solve them to make a better solution? Or how can I bring things together or come up with novel ways of attacking the problem to provide a better solution? And that never left me. And therefore, in the face of the frustration I was facing, I had the gall to think I could give it a good go. And it turned out it's turned out pretty well. So I'm certainly glad I made the jump.
Yeah, and so I think that leads us really nicely on to what we were talking about just prior to the podcast, which was about culture and people and building your own business and taking that leap from leaving a established company and an amazing team with management buy-in. When you were thinking about the type of business you wanted to build, what really stood out to you of the type of culture you have created, and what's important to you about the culture of your business?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think when we set up HX, this was really key in my mind. And one of the first things I did, this will probably telling about me, is I picked the color scheme, drew the logo, and then I wrote down our values. Because and I can't remember quite in that order. Maybe that tells you something about me, that colors and logos are very important to me as much as values. My team will have a good chuckle at that. But I think, having worked in a large corporate world for a really long time, and like I said, I had a great run as an actuary, did that for 12 years, and quite frankly, I always make the joke that if I could have bought the software that I needed, I might still have been in a suit, and clearly no one's in a suit anymore, but you get the gist of the joke. One of the things that I was very focused on and very motivated, though, was very large corporates, they operate in a relatively structural, rigid, top-down way. And that was really useful for me in certain parts of my career, but it certainly in my mind wasn't the most effective or efficient way to build a business that needed to grow very fast and wanted to really solve some frontier problems. Because as I said, the solutions to the problems that we wanted to have, this is why I always used to marvel. I was like, how can a $700 billion industry not actually have any of these tools? It turns out it's actually really hard to build these tools. There's a good reason why people weren't as foolhardy as we were back in the day to jump and try and take them on. But one of the things that really mattered to me was to build a culture that was much more bottom up rather than top down. And I think, HX, we hit some incredible milestones, revenue milestones, growth milestones, profitability milestones with a very, very small team. We hit our first $1 million of revenue with a team of 6. for
Wow.
example, which is, I think, really, really unusual. But one of the things that we did there was we had a team who were real owners, and strategy and kind of the kind of thematic ideas that we want to take on, they tend to be a little bit more top down, understandably so, because we've got founders who understand the kind of intersection of the business problem, the commercial opportunity, and the technical challenges. And that we're well placed to kind of cascade that through the business. But then actually, the how you go about doing it, the what needs to be done, that's very, very bottom up at HX. So, we have a really, really strong culture of ownership and accountability. And I think those two things have to go really, really hand in hand. I always say that I never want HX to be an easy place to work. I want it to be a really fun place to work and a really challenging place to work, in a place that when you work, the analogy that I like is, if no one goes to the gym to have fun, right? I mean, maybe there are some people that go to the gym to have fun. I certainly don't. I go to the gym very regularly. I installed a very small weightlifting gym in my garden in the pandemic, which is a very Amrit thing to do. But you don't go out there to have fun. You go out there to actually train and get results. And it's the results as a function of the effort you put in that really, really matter. And I think when I look at the culture we've built at HX, it's a culture where, it's, again, lots of sporting analogy, and I'm not a very sporty person. Anyone who's listening, my friends who are listening to this will be laughing because I'm using all these sporting analogies. But it's like, if you're pushing really, really hard in any sporting endeavor, it hurts when you're there. And then you look back and you're like, wow, that was really, really great. And I think we've got this amazing culture that we work together. We work hard on hard problems, and it's, always interesting and challenging and novel, or certainly that for a large amount of the time. But the real satisfaction comes from going, wow, I wasn't sure that was actually possible, but turns out that it was, and we did it. And you get huge growth. I talk a huge amount at HX about growth, success, and happiness. These three things, which are kind of reasonably kind of orthogonal concepts. You can have one or two of them without having the other. But if we can set up HX so that that people are solving the problems or trying to solve the problems in their day-to-day lives that are going to give them growth, success, and happiness, and that aligns with HX's overall problem, then actually kind of success is just a function of that. That's broadly what I see my job as, for the record, is trying to align the growth, success, and happiness of every team, person, individual at HX with HX's overall growth, success, and happiness. If I do a good job of that as CEO, if I can do that well as CEO, kind of success just, as I said, it comes naturally.
Yeah, and I could not agree with you more around how the end result being, whatever it might be, whether it's revenue, profit, growth, it's actually all about the function of the teams that you have, and the more inspired the team, the outcome is just the pure result of what you put in. And I do love your sporting analogies. I'm a huge rugby fan myself, and so I've never really thought about it, but that's exactly what I think about in the days I used to play rugby. Is, during the game you're in pain, and although you're
Yeah.
enjoying parts of it, you're in pain. But at the minute the final whistle and you've got that result and you look back on what you've achieved, you want to do it again, because it's all
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
that achievement, I guess.
Yeah, completely so. And I think, one thing I would say is a high growth technology startup, a fintech startup, is not for everyone, right?
Mm.
And I think one of the things that you learn a huge amount about yourself when you set up a business or you work in a high growth business. And we talk a lot at HX about acceptance versus ambition, right? And I think these are very different attitudes that people have towards doing difficult things. And some people want to do difficult things, right? And I think this is the key thing, and I would never sugarcoat it. Working in a high growth fintech is hard, right? It's a hard job to do, and lots of jobs are hard. I'm not saying it's the only hard job. It's challenging. You've got large, very, very discerning, very demanding customers, pressure to grow, important milestones that you need to hit, and lots of uncertainty. But if you've got people who want to solve those problems, they've got the get out what you put in mentality. And I think there are lots of people in the world, who maybe don't want to work at a startup, who are less suited to work at a startup, who are much like, work is work, right? And that's cool. And I accept I've got to do it, and it's work, and it takes up a certain amount of my time, and it's a means to an end. And that acceptance mindset is very different. And, we very rarely, that's not the sort of mindset that tends to thrive at HX. And I think, like you say, that your analogy of, it's like the wow, yeah, it hurts when you're grinding. on the rugby pitch, but you feel great afterwards.
Yeah,
The one thing I would say, and I think this is probably important because my team would be like, Amrit, you're making HX out to sound like pain and blood on the rugby field. One thing I would say to that, and I think this is a really important intersection to doing hard things and thriving out of them, is that the most important, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, I think, the most important variable to me is enjoying your work, right? Is passion and enjoying what you do. And I think, something can be very difficult in the moment, but that doesn't take away from the abstract, great satisfaction and feeling you get, before and after, but also during. And I think that is the secret. I think it's not the sort of thing where you're like, I want to grow, so I have to do this. It's actually, no, I'm passionate about it, and it's not just the result that justifies it. It's it doesn't feel like work a lot of the time. Right, and I think that's a very important kind of overarching theme. You hear it a lot at HX about the passion that people have for their work, but for their extracurricular subjects as well.
Yeah, and again, I do think that's a really good point, because what I love about this is your candidness, that we shouldn't sugarcoat that there is a difference between a work, working for a paycheck versus working for a career or for success or passion. And startups aren't for everyone. I totally agree with you with many of our clients. And actually, this isn't just for our STEM listeners, but also I try to manage expectations of at every stage of someone's career that the type of business they join has to fit not just the salary that has been offered. Actually, it's more important is what are they going to get out of it from a passion and a reward and a self-satisfaction. And if they do want a 9 to 5 and actually the salary, a stable salary and a 9 to 5 job is what they want, there's an industry that suits that, but it won't necessarily be the high growth, fast tech ones that will attract a different type. And for our graduate listeners, which I'd love us to move on to, because I think for many of our listeners, when they're thinking about their career, my advice to them, and I wonder if you share it, Amrit, is go for ambition, go for a business that will get the best out of you, not the business that stays safe and you will be bored within 12 months or 24 months and want to leave.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there. And to me, the one thing I would just qualify before taking that thread and pulling on it a little bit is hours is definitely a part of it. It's not the be all and end all about the, in terms of what intensity is. To me, the biggest thing about intensity is how you deal with problems, whether it can be, challenges, which can be working hours related. You don't certainly get out what you put in with respect to that to a certain extent, but more about dealing with uncertainty. And I think you just touched on that, right? It's actually about, there's uncertainty in a risk versus reward environment from a business stability point of view, but there's uncertainty also about, do I want to take on problems that I'm not sure I know how to solve? Yeah. Right? Do I want to work in a domain where someone's going to ask me to do something, and you'll say, well, how do I do that? And they say, no, I don't know. That's your job to work out how to do it. Or do you want to actually work for something where it's a little bit more productionized and actually someone's going to teach you, they're going to give you an instruction list and you're going to crank it? And just horses for courses, as you said.
Yeah.
But with respect to your point about risk, I think, I have a podcast. I hope you don't mind me just mentioning it now. It's called Startup Dads. I'm a startup founder. I'm also a dad, and we ask. We get really great entrepreneurs and startup founders and investors and people from the startup community, and we ask them questions about the intersection between building a business and having a family, and how they do both, because it's something that's difficult. And I can tell you firsthand that being a dad, first-time dad, is difficult, and running a startup is difficult, and doing them both is very difficult. But the reason I was talking about that is one of the things that comes up a huge amount. And I think we had Fred Destin, who's a legendary venture capitalist, on the show. It's definitely worth a listen to that episode. He just talks really neatly about the fact that you can take much more risk early in your life than you think you can. Right? And I think, particularly, and, I'll say this to you, I was born in Sri Lanka. I came from, I'm a proud assimilated immigrant to England. And, stability and security is something that was really important to me when I got a job. Because I was like, you know what? We worked really hard and had more than our fair share of struggle when we were young to get ourselves educated and build a life for ourselves. But one of the things I think that people underestimate is you definitely want to have a baseline of security and stability, but it's generally far, far lower than the average graduate, STEM graduate needs. 15 lattes a month, lots of drinking. I think the current generation of graduates are far more sensible and spend less time destroying their brain cells with alcohol than previous generations did, and I think that's a fantastic thing. But the baseline level of comfort that you need to be stable and secure is far, far lower than you think it is, and the opportunity to take risk. As you get older, you naturally accumulate more dependencies, more external obligations. The opportunity to take risk diminishes, generally in a quite an irreversible way. Having kids is a good example of definitely an irreversible thing. But there are a few other things that are very difficult to reverse too. If you have ambitions to buy your own house, or you have other dependents or people that you need to look after as people get older within your family circle or your friendship circle. And the first thing, that's the first thing I would say is you can take a lot more risk. I'm not suggesting you go out there and you throw all your money into the most random crypto stock or something like that, right? That's not what I mean. What I mean is look really carefully at what you need, and look really carefully at actually what you need, what really matters to you now and what you can see mattering to you in the future, and then work out what actual risk you can afford to take. And that will be different for everyone. There's no doubt about that. We have team members at HX who took almost no money at the beginning of our journey, and were paid in equity. Effectively, we offered them. That wasn't something we forced anyone to do, but that was a good example of them not wanting for anything. Sure, they weren't going out buying takeaways for dinner every day, but they've made an amazing investment in themselves and put themselves in a financial strength that certainly most people would be very, very glad to have at a very young age. It's worth just mentioning HX, our founding team of engineers, STEM graduates. One of them graduated from Cambridge, and then the next day started at HX. Elliot, our first ever team member, Elliot, was at Imperial. He was studying at Imperial. He actually did his internship at HX, and he ended up finishing his degree a year early, cutting it short to work at HX. So we are STEM graduates through and through. But yeah, that's the first thing I would say with respect to risk and career advice. The second one I would say, I don't know if it's okay for me to run through onto my next point.
Please, yes.
Yeah. So the second, probably the last point I would say is, if you work in STEM, we have never had. If you're studying STEM right now, a STEM subject, we have never had such an era where pretty much any problem in the world has a technology angle. There are technology startups building grocery delivery startups, right? We live in an era where technology, everyone, Andreessen Horowitz, one of the leading venture capitalists, they say software is eating the world, right? And science and technology, STEM is, you basically can, anything that you remotely find interesting, you can go and find a STEM job in it, right? What an amazing position to be in. Absolutely amazing position. So I would say two things. Be careful of projecting what you find interesting as a subject, be careful of conflating that as something that you'll find interesting as a job. So that's the first piece of advice I would say is, working for a company that does grocery delivery. If you, I don't know why I'm picking on grocery delivery for whatever reason, but the grocery delivery and the work involved in grocery delivery startups, those are two completely different things.
Yeah.
But a corollary to that, a really nice corollary to that, is that you can pretty much find a STEM job in any topic, any subject, right? Any subject. If you're studying a STEM degree now, the subject that you find most interesting, you can go and find a highly impactful job somewhere out there that is related to the subject, the subdomain of knowledge that you found most interesting when you were studying. And I think there are far too many people that think too much about actually the high level business, which I think is important, and I think you want to have a sense of mission and enjoy the success of your business. But actually, one thing I would say, the biggest driver of success I've ever seen in people in my team, predominantly in my career as a mathematician and then a engineering business founder, So most of the people who have worked for me have been STEM graduates. The number one driver of success from them is how interested the actual work they have been doing has been to them. And, I use that phrase, pulling on a thread. If they find the work that they're doing in the day-to-day interesting, they've become domain leaders and world beaters in that subject. And to me, I would say, think very carefully about actually what you love doing. Don't go, what's the most, DevOps, right? Even maybe a year ago was the most hot thing. So, DevOps, I should go do that. Think of what you really, really love and go and follow that, because your interest will drive your success, and you've got a long time to specialize. So pull on that thread that you find the most interesting and you're most interested to pull on first, would be the advice I would have.
And I think both of those points have absolutely hit some really, really poignant points. What I loved about what you just said, and again, helping to recap for our listeners, the understanding what risk you can take, and the reality is, the younger we are, without being ageist, or the more less dependence we have, as you said, there is that risk that we should take. That that you're young enough to be able to make mistakes. In fact, and we had a slight joke earlier, didn't we? That probably you and I've learned more by my mistakes than I have of my successes. But making those mistakes at the beginning of my career rather than towards the middle or latter age, they are learning points, and they're not suddenly causing the stress and frustration that may affect others. And what I secondly loved was, you're so right. Find the subjects that you have an interest in, and you will be able to back it with a technology or with a business that shares that passion. And that just takes a bit of research and a bit of time to think more out of not just the standard, I have got a degree now, I need to join a bank or a law firm or an established FMCG, but actually I can really think about what I want, because you will become a domain expert. I love those points.
Yeah. One of my friends uses a really wonderful phrase, which he says, the world is creating STEM problems at a rate far faster than it is creating people available to solve them. Right?
Yeah,
and that's a positive sum environment to be in. So go get it.
Yeah, what a brilliant way to summarize. That's fantastic. Well, Amrit, thank you. Can you believe that time has flown by, and to hear your passion through not just the business you've built and your story, but actually the culture and your advice to our listeners. It's so evident to hear. This is something that it's the blood in your veins, isn't it? It's not just something that you
absolutely
put on. So for me, thank you so much for being a guest on our podcast.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
And for our listeners, that is another episode of our Future Tech podcast series. So, as always, the podcast is on the Arrows Group landing page, arrowspodcasts.com. It's on the career portal of 34 universities now. And it's also on our dedicated Spotify channel. So everything will be linked in both our LinkedIn posts, but also on our Arrows podcast page. So a final thank you to everyone tuning in, listening and downloading the podcast. And until the next one, everyone, have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Future Tech with Charlie Sell, a podcast from Arrows Group Global. Please subscribe to this podcast so that you never miss an episode. Arrows Group is a global technology recruitment and workforce solutions provider who focus on people at the heart of all our interactions. With in-depth technology expertise and global candidate communities, we offer bespoke solutions to every client and candidate. To find out more, visit arrowsgroup.com.